Welcome to the latest episode of Don't Take This as Gospel. I'm Mike Partika, and we are in the last of a series on Mormonism, and as you can tell, the subject is polygamy and how Mormons never rejected it. Now, if some of you are familiar with Mormonism, you'll realize, but wait, Mike, they actually have rejected polygamy. There's no Mormon polygamy anymore, except in those fundamentalist cults like the Warren Jeffs thing and various offshoots. Maybe they're doing their own little sister wives thing behind the scenes, but they're not actually legally marrying or doing anything like that, which is true. There is no official acceptance anymore of polygamy within the Mormon Church, but that's not really the same as saying that Mormons have rejected polygamy, and I will go into an example of why. First off, let's go into a quick primer on Mormonism. It is officially known as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. That's their preferred name. And it was founded by Joseph Smith Jr. in the 1820s. Joseph Smith Jr. was an American who saw the multiplicity of Christian denominations around him and was plagued by the fact that he couldn't figure out which of these churches was supposed to be the true faith. And so, miracle upon miracles, he had a vision of God and Jesus telling him that the true Christian faith had actually been lost and needed to be restored, and that Joseph Smith Jr. was the one who was going to do it. So Joseph Smith Jr. developed a cult and eventually moved with them to Nauvoo, Illinois, where he introduced polygamy into Mormonism and was eventually shot to death by a mob, possibly led by political rivals. So, the Mormon scriptures are the Old Testament and the New Testament, which are shared with Christianity, and then exclusive to Mormonism is the Book of Mormon, Doctrine and Covenants. I'm always saying Doctrines and Covenants. It just seems so easier to say it that way, but it is Doctrine and Covenants, and the Pearl of Great Price. And it'll be Doctrine and Covenants that we will be focusing on today. So, how did Mormon polygamy come about? Well, around, I believe it was 1829-ish or so, or maybe, I wonder if that was back in one of my other things. Not really sure about the date of this, but anyway, Doctrine and Covenants section 132 records the institution of polygamy, and Joseph Smith Jr. received a revelation from God saying that ordinary marriage is not enough to fully exalt a man. Such a man can be saved, but that man can only rise to the level of an angel and not to the level of a god. So in Mormonism, you have this idea that resurrected human beings can become angels and some can become gods. If you're a god, you will have your own spirit children eventually, whom you might wind up creating a world for and having indwell in bodies, much the same as the Heavenly Father of Mormonism, who is akin to the God of the Bible, but not exactly. It is to Mormons, but not to Christians. Christians would reject certain things of this. That is what the God of Mormonism did, was Heavenly Father and Heavenly Mother banged out a whole bunch of kids in the spirit realms who then became embodied on Earth. It's some stuff that I am not going to get into right now because it's just, All right, so back to polygamy. Only if a man marries in the Mormon Church and that marriage is sealed for time and for eternity can a man be exalted to godhood. And furthermore, since doing what Abraham did is needed to be a true child of Abraham, and this is something that Jesus said basically in John chapter 8. The Pharisees were getting on his case, and they said, well, we have Abraham for our father. And he said, well, if you were truly children of Abraham, you would do the works of Abraham. But as it is, you do your works of the father, the devil, and therefore you're children of the devil. So Joseph Smith took this particular line and used that to say, hey, since doing what Abraham did is needed to be a true child of Abraham, then it stands to reason that Mormon men should take multiple wives just as Abraham did. And I say it stands to reason, actually. This is all in the context of a revelation from God, God saying this is what you need to do. So in Mormonism, Mormonism as Joseph Smith established it, a man may marry any number of women so long as for each additional marriage he obtains the consent of all his current wives. Now, all of these wives will produce children for a man, both in this world and in the world to come, and that makes his increasing exaltation to the level of godhood possible. So, really, one of the objectives in Mormonism is to have a bunch of kids. You have a bunch of wives, you have a bunch of kids, and so your kids' prayers and your wives' prayers will elevate you into godhood, and then they and you will all, reign over your own particular world or planet or what have you down the line. So that is why you will see Mormons have large families, because that's kind of the directive toward getting more exaltation for the man. Now, as it happened, polygamy was really a miserable experience for the women who had to endure it. Sister wives very seldom got along, and I got most of this from a book called The Women of Mormonism, and it was a book that contained basically slices of Mormon wives' life that they were using to plead with Congress to end polygamy. So there is a book online, you can find it, and you can also find it on Amazon. And I'll provide the affiliate link in my video description for that book. So sister wives very seldom got along, as they were having to ration one man, their husband, among them, not only with regard to their personal sexual fulfillment, but also with regard to the very survival of themselves and their children. They were trying to, get enough resources to survive, and one man was providing for multiple families. The division of these resources was rarely equal. There were contentions among the various households were high, and there was much favoritism and political maneuvering. I think there was a show on Showtime called Big Love that actually covered some of the machinations that would go on among the wives in a Mormon household. I've never watched the show myself, but I've heard good things about it. So it stars the late Bill Paxton, who, golly, I miss that guy. You might remember him from the movie Aliens as the one who said, "Game over, man! Game over!" Oh, he was in so many good movies, including Frailty and one of the best sci-fi movies ever, Edge of Tomorrow with Tom Cruise. So, wow, that's a discursion for you. I'm talking about sci-fi movies now. Okay, so back to polygamy. Mormon men who were happy with one wife came under extreme social and religious pressure from other Mormon men to live their religion by taking more wives. You couldn't get away with just having one wife, even if you were happy that way, because then you were setting a bad example for all of the men who wanted to have multiple wives. Then their wives could point to you and say, well, he's happy with just one wife. Why aren't you happy with me? And so these men came under serious pressure until they finally buckled and ended up taking a new wife. Now, Mormon women who refused to become sister wives were often blood atoned or flat out murdered for their refusal. There was a period during early Mormon history called the Reformation, and this was especially bloody, and it practically emptied Utah of single women. There was not a woman in the Utah territory to be found that could be married off. And so, because of this lack of women, the practice of sending out missionaries started. It was developed as a way to draw people to Utah so that there would be more women to marry, because they had run out. So that is how the whole Mormon missionary thing got started. Now, how did polygamy come to a quote-unquote end? Throughout the mid to late 1800s, Mormon women wrote testimonies like the book I mentioned, which will be in the video description with an affiliate link. Mormon women wrote testimonies of their plight under Mormon polygamy and pleaded with Congress to outlaw polygamy in the whole United States, which it did. Now, and this was held to be constitutional by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said that yes, Congress can outlaw polygamy. Now, the church was originally defiant. They kept on doing their plural marriage thing. But the government began to confiscate church funds and church property, and it would throw people in jail, and it was all on account of continuing to practice polygamy in violation of federal law. So, facing bankruptcy and dissolution if the government pressure continued, The reigning prophet of the LDS Church, this is the person who inherited the position from Joseph Smith, not inherited genetically, but inherited by way of, was appointed to be his successor, went from Joseph Smith to Brigham Young and then to later on to others. The reigning prophet, Wilford Woodruff, issued a manifesto which officially ended the practice of polygamy. And he did so via a new revelation from God that overturned the prior revelation from God. This manifesto was later included in the Mormon Book of Scripture, Doctrine and Covenants, as Official Declaration 1. There are two official declarations in the Mormon book, Doctrine and Covenants. I believe Official Declaration 2 was the one that opened up the priesthood to black males. Originally, black men were excluded from the priesthood, and Official Declaration 2 reversed that. So Official Declaration 1 was the reversal of polygamy. So here are some excerpts from Official Declaration 1, and I want you to kind of get a good feel and a good sense for this. Inasmuch as laws have been enacted by Congress forbidding plural marriages, which laws have been pronounced constitutional by the Supreme Court, I now publicly declare that my advice to the Latter-day Saints is to refrain from contracting any marriage forbidden by the law of the land. The question is this: which is the wisest course for the Latter-day Saints to pursue? To continue to attempt to practice plural marriage, with the laws of the nation against it and the opposition of 60 millions of people, and at the cost of the confiscation and loss of all the temples, and the stopping of all the ordinances therein, both for the living and the dead. The Mormons have this practice of baptizing the dead and basically including the dead in the Mormon faith, even though they're dead. And this is one of the reasons, by the way, Mormons are big on genealogy, because a person who is dead can only be baptized into the Mormon Church by a descendant. So Mormons will go and do their family tree and figure out how far back they go, and then if there are any non-Mormons in their family tree, they will do this baptism for the dead ceremony and graft them into the Mormon Church that way. So that's what it's talking about as far as ordinances for the dead. The stopping of all the ordinances therein, both for the living and the dead, and the imprisonment of the first presidency and 12, and the heads of families in the church. The 12 is like the 12 apostles of the Mormon Church. There's a council called the 12, and the confiscation of personal property of the people, and all of which of themselves would stop the practice of plural marriage. Or, after doing and suffering what we have through our adherence to this principle, to cease the practice and submit to the law. So what does this passage all basically say? It basically says, okay, Congress has passed a law forbidding polygamy, and the Supreme Court has upheld it. There's nothing we can do to change it. And because there's nothing we can do to change it, that settles the matter. And because defying the law would end up destroying the Mormon Church, just flat out bankrupting it, dissolving it, and it would wind up causing the practice of polygamy to be stopped anyway, we may as well go ahead and just quit. We're just going to quit doing polygamy, and that way we can still survive as a church, and the government will stop persecuting us. And all of this, by the way, is couched in the terms of a revelation from God. I didn't want to put the whole thing there, but you can go and look that up for yourself. Go to the LDS.org site and then look up scriptures and Doctrine and Covenants and look for Official Declaration 1, and you can read the whole thing. It's all couched in the language of Revelation. So anyway, all of this is basically saying we would love to continue with plural marriages, but we can't by law. And our church will be destroyed if we try to continue it. And therefore, we may as well go ahead and stop, because if they destroy us, well, that's going to stop the plural marriages anyway. And there are a whole bunch of other things and benefits, there is to the church, and we don't want the church to die out, etc., etc. Okay. So what is missing from Official Declaration 1? Well, there's no notion whatsoever that polygamy is wrong. There's no acknowledgement of any of the misery that polygamy caused. There's no acknowledgement of the essential unfairness of these wives having to compete with one another for their husband's affections or their husband's resources, or of the children that would suffer neglect because a husband had one wife who was his favorite and another one who was, she's getting up in years, and so she's on the way out as far as his good graces are concerned. There's no notion of that at all, that there was anything wrong with polygamy. So what does that mean going forward? Well, it means that if Congress were ever to reverse itself and re-legalize polygamy, or, if the Supreme Court were to declare that plural marriage was something that Congress could not deny to people, well, then the Mormon Church will bring back polygamy. They kind of have to, don't they? Because according to Joseph Smith, God wanted them to be in plural marriages. And the only reason that God said you need to stop with the plural marriages is because Congress forbade it. So what happens if Congress no longer forbids plural marriage? Well, you should expect that polygamy will come roaring right back with all its misery. We've got a ticking time bomb in our midst, in a sense. Mormon polygamy, and of course in Islam, there's also allowed up to 4 marriages, so I would almost say that Mormons and Muslims would be natural allies on this particular issue. If polygamy ever becomes part of the law of the land again, if it becomes legalized, you can expect the Mormon Church is going to bring it back. So what do we do about that? Well, of course, you can't do anything about Mormonism itself, but one of the things that I personally have proposed in my book, The Cultural Bill of Rights, 12 Amendments to Help America Stay America, is a marriage standardization amendment, which would forbid polygamy and group marriages. So I would encourage you to check out the video associated with that, and also look for the book online on Amazon. I have it available. If you look up Mike Partika, you will find my author page, and you will soon find the Cultural Bill of Rights book prominently featured on there. So yeah, there is this ticking time bomb of a return to polygamy that could happen with the Mormon Church. And boy, just having read the stories from that Women of Mormonism book, which I will also give you the link to, an affiliate link in my video description, yeah, you don't want to see that come back. All right, so I'm Mike Partika. Thank you for accompanying me on this 4 video excursion on Mormonism. There was one in the middle about John the Beloved Disciple that wasn't quite part of the Mormonism thing, but was associated with one of the stories about it. If you haven't seen the other videos, do go back and take a look. I hope you'll find them entertaining as well. And do subscribe in case you want to pick up on the next videos that are coming out. And other than that, I will talk to you later.